and start to work with it. Also, I could help, hopefully, give you some tools with which to manage some of that bias. That is what a lot of people ask me for. How can I mitigate some of this? I have a friend that says this. How can I mitigate that? What can I say? And I'm hoping I'll give you a fraction of that. And I can only say a fraction because I can't do it all today. I am Dr. Diane. I do run a 501c, justasocializing.net. And you can reach me at justasocializing@gmail.com. I do this work at the university. I also do it in the community with the police department. I've been working with them for like 6 years. I love to work with them because they're the ones that's standing out there getting the bricks and rocks thrown at them right now. And it has been coming about for a while, but there's a lot of history to why that is the way it is. So I don't believe that any 2 or 3 people make a whole group of people rotten. I would have to say that about being African American myself, because when I look at how we get portrayed in the world over time, we don't always get portrayed in the best light. And all of us are not these horrendous hoodlums that we get portrayed to be. We're normal people who love our families, who love people, and we want to get along. And I don't want to exactly say what the young man said out in California, but can't we all just get along? Now, a couple objectives for today that I want explicitly to hope that you'll leave with is to name one cause of implicit bias. And remember, we're not going to change that today. May not even change in a decade, but we need to be aware of it. And we want to share one bias that may be an unconscious bias. I'm going to stop this share and I'm going to share another screen, because that's what I'll be doing throughout today, is stopping screens and starting screens. My share screen just left. I don't know where oh, there it is. I'm sorry. I was about to ask my boss, but that's okay. I see it. And I want to bring you to the agenda I sent out to Doug. I hope he'll share this with you because I have links in this agenda. Also, I have an evaluation at the bottom. I would love to hear what you have to say. And it's only 1 or 2 questions, and I put it in form where you can text. So you can pretend like you're on Facebook, you know, with a handle, because nobody will know who you are. And you can just start talking about how you thought this sucked and how you hate it. And you hope Doug never puts you through this again. You can write it in there. And I wanted to do it that way because I don't want to direct you to a response. I want to hear from you. So how did we get here? Now, that's a great question. So I'm going to share my screen again, because there's quite a bit to life that maybe we don't know, because in life itself, some days I'm just busy trying to keep up, and I'm not necessarily concerned about what somebody else is saying or doing. I'm trying to keep my head above the water. So in that vein, sometimes when we're trying to keep our head above the water, we're not paying attention to a lot of what's going on in the world, and you don't have time to sit down and read about everything that's happened in the past. Can everyone see my screen? Tracking protests across the USA. Okay. Now, look at that. That's where the protests are going throughout the United States. That's not something maybe that any of us are proud of. I've heard some people say, well, it's good. At least we have it out there in the open. I can agree with that. Peaceful protests are always good. I will bring up some points. We hear a lot of times, well, it's not peaceful. I don't know why we have to deal with that. You know, they're burning buildings and what have you. There's something called grief, and people manage grief in different ways. There are several stages to it. First of all, there's the event, and then there is the anger. And sometimes when people are angry, they don't always do things that you and I would do because maybe we aren't angry. And that's one of the stages of grief. Now, I'm going to take you back to the 16th Street bombing in Birmingham I think it was 1963 or 4, the 16th Street bombing. It was at the Right Reverend Rice, R-I-C-E. It was at his church. Now, the Right Reverend Rice is Condoleezza's father. Condoleezza Rice was our Secretary of State under President G.W. Okay, I'm acting like I know him personally, but Bush, President Bush. They went to school together, George and Condoleezza, at Stanford, I believe it was. But she is the Right Reverend Rice's daughter, and the Right Reverend Rice was the pastor for that church that was bombed. Those four little girls that died were her friends. It took the government, it took the FBI, it took the world of investigation 16 plus years to bring anybody forward for charges against, or at least an indictment for that atrocity. It takes a long, long time when it's an African American person, at least historically, to bring justice to bear. But when Dr. Martin Luther King took children out to protest, and I'll pause to say the reason he took children out was because the adults were all locked up in jail. So he took children from parents and said, is it okay? Would you let us bring them out to protest? And the parents did. That's the famous picture you see with the gentleman. It seems like a dog is attacking him. There were dogs put out. Let me just tell you, dogs and fire hoses. Bull Connor, I totally remember that. Bull Connor did that. In that particular instance, the gentleman, the young kid, was actually playing with the dog, I'm told. But that does not take away from the fact that dogs and hoses were placed as a defense to push the protesters back. So when you look at history, some people just cannot silently protest because the establishment says, no, you can't protest. Here come the hoses, here come the dogs. We exact a price on certain types of people, brown and black, when they come out to silently protest. You can exact a price on a black person if in fact they've offended a white person. I'll take you back to Emmett Till. And this gentleman was 14 years old, came to visit his family in Mississippi for the summer. He was in Chicago as a place where he lived. He ended up coming into a store, buying something, and as he left, he said to the white woman behind the counter, bye baby, see you baby, something to that effect. And of course, within an hours, 3 o'clock in the morning, the white man came to the house, got the kid, because the adults knew they had to give the kid up. This was his uncle. There's no way you fight the authority because you're black and you have no gun, you have really nothing. And if you did have a gun, you would never get away with it. So they gave the child up, and that child ended up with bullets in his back of his head and sunk down in a river. And you can Google the pictures, it's horrific. But the mother wanted the pictures of that child to be shown so that the world would know how her child died. I bring that up to bring you forward to say, you will exact a penalty. The government, the establishment will exact a penalty very quickly if you offend a white person back in the day of the history of where we've come from that has brought us to where we are now. But in fact, if a black person, example I gave were the 4 girls in the 16th Street Baptist Church, the bombing, it took 16 plus years to find someone to indict. And it is documented in the literature that they in fact knew pretty well who had done it, but you just can't say, I know somebody did it. You've got to have evidence. And they did not have evidence. And it took a while to get the evidence. So I bring that here to say, here we are now. That was in the 60s. Here we are, 60 years later, and we are doing this. And this is probably a picture that no one wants to see. I would prefer not to see this, but this is where we are. And this is why we're doing so many of these webinars and presentations, because we want to get to a place where we can talk, where we're not arguing, where we're not divided, because when you're divided, everybody is eventually going to fall to some point. We have to come together. This is something we've got to work on together. I'm going to stop that share. I'm going to bring another share, because not only where we've come from, but let's go and look at how we can talk about what it is we would like to do. If we know where we came from, can we try to understand who we are? You all may remember Pavlov. He is Ivan, or was Ivan Pavlov. He was a Russian physiologist. You may remember the dog experiment where he actually was a professor and he was studying digestive enzymes. And studying these enzymes, he stumbled upon the fact that the dog would salivate whenever he showed up. He had already put some little tubes in the jaws of the dog because he was extracting saliva and he was going to do experiments on it. But what he realized was every time he put food in front of the dog would salivate. Okay, that's good. He expected that. But he started to notice that even when he came in the room, when his lab tech showed up, just a white coat, the dog would salivate. So what happened after that? A gentleman by the name of John Watson, I'm proud to talk about him because in 1913, this man was born in Travelers Rest, South Carolina. That is probably 30 minutes from my hometown, which was in Ivor, South Carolina. John Watson did something called the little Albert experiment because he took this a little bit further. If a dog can sense a stimulus and have a response in terms of salivating, then what does that mean for humans? He took the dog, the little boy, Albert, who was an orphan, by the way. 9-month-old Albert was exposed to animals, rabbits, rats, monkeys, fire. He did not respond in fear at all. So what do you think he did? What do you think Watson did? Watson said, well, let me see if I can frighten him. So he took a hammer and hit it against a metal bar, and that frightened the child. So now he puts a rat in front of the child and he bangs the metal, and the child cries because he's startled because of the metal. So now he decides, okay, I'll take this away and just put the rat there. So just seeing the rat frightened him because he knew this loud noise was going to come. So why did I talk about that? I talked about that because what I'm telling you is human behavior is learned. It is trained. It is indoctrinated in us all. What I want us to do is try to re-educate ourselves. We've been indoctrinated to feel a certain way about certain things. We can change. We do not have to be little Albert, and we don't have to be the dog. But you all know dogs are trainable. You've probably got them. This is why we pay money to take our dogs to get them trained, because you can train them. Humans can be trained as well. You train your children when to go to bed. You train them when to get up. We train them when there's going to be food. People are trainable. Now, what does that mean for us? Where are we now? How did we get here? Where are we going? Think about where you have been in your life, where you have been trained to think a certain way. Look at the job you're in. Are there trainings? Yes, there are. Are there certain processes and procedures that are in place in order for the organization in which you work to function? Yes, there are. Why do you think these exist? They exist because you are in a culture of insurance, risk management, and it's ran by the government, I'm guessing, and Doug can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a culture and a society of people. And in working in this culture and society, you have agreed to abide by certain rules that are in this society. And when you break a rule, someone says something to you, particularly if breaking that rule is affecting the effective operation of this organization. That is why we live in societies, and that is why we manage in societies, because societies have rules. You have rules, and you have been trained. And if you break those rules, typically there are consequences. And you don't want consequences stacking up, because we know if they stack up after a while, there gets to be a little bit more severe consequence. We have been living in a society of people called humans over the years. And in the society as we live, we agree to certain behaviors. We're not going to walk into each other's houses and take stuff and walk out. We're not going to break into each other's houses. We respect their lawns. We respect the front yard. We respect the backyard. We respect each other's spaces. We agree that we're not going to ransack and kill and pilfer. That is how societies are set up. Right now, our society is somewhat broken because the very people that we expect to protect us sometimes are not exactly falling within what we may consider the rules of society. I'm going to share my screen again. I worked a lot with a gentleman from the University of Utah. He wrote a book, and it's called The Religion of a Different Color, The Mormon Struggle for Whiteness. I guess I'm looking for the book. And I mention this book because we're in Utah and we have a dominant religion. And I think it's important to understand sometimes how we've processed the world. And I want to read to you some parts of a speech that he gives, and he has given me permission to share this. In the 19th century America, whiteness dominated the social, political, and economic life of the country. Politicians equated being white with citizenship and fitness for self-rule. This is very true. If you look at a lot of the rules and the acts that were made by the United States back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, they were made pretty much based on white skin. You could own land in America if you were white. Black people, brown people there were stipulations for brown. Blacks, they were not yet at a point where they were recognized as citizens. They were pretty much 1/5 of a man. They were not allowed to own land. Well, if you don't own land, then you can't apply for citizenship. So you can see the dynamics there. That's going to preclude a lot of people from applying for citizenship. It was a socially imagined category which was taken for granted, deemed normal or natural, and functioned as the preferred condition in American history. That's important to say because being white is normal. This is why some people don't like when you say white race. Well, those are terms that came from the government, the term race. So we're in races. We're in RACESs. Because we're in RACESs, that might make us RACISTS by no fault of our own. But we do live in races. But I think sometimes the norm sees themselves as norm and they don't like to be called the white race. That is something that may cause contention sometimes. But white is normal, is natural. Anything else, and I don't like to use the term abnormal because now I'm equating normal. And as some of us would say, normal is a dial on the dryer. So we don't really know anymore where normal is, except when it comes to whiteness. Then we have that division. In 1790, the United States Congress established a precedent when it passed a Naturalization Act that limited citizenship to free white persons. Again, back to who could own land. Again, who was free? We know Black people weren't free, and a lot of Mexicans and Asians even were here and were asking for citizenship. There were acts put in place, again, about color of skin, which decides who can own land, who can be a citizen. And so obviously, if you're a citizen, you can vote. So that's going to X out a lot of people from being citizens and from voting. In 1790, the United States Congress established a precedent when it passed a Naturalization Act that limited citizenship to free white persons. I wanted to read that again because, again, we go back to what is normal. In 1848, Senator Calhoun, and I love this because Calhoun was from the South. We even have a town about 10 miles from my hometown called Calhoun Falls. And that's where he succumbed to the Northern soldiers. I never knew when I was growing up why it was called Calhoun Falls. I learned as I grew up. Anyway, Senator Calhoun reinforced that principle when he declared on the floor of the U.S. Senate, democracy is the government of the white race. So again, being white is normal. And when the term white privilege is used, this is where it comes from. Many of these spaces and many of the opportunities that are afforded you when you're white. The U.S. Supreme Court, in its Dred Scott decision in 1857, expressed a similar sentiment that declared blacks possessed no rights, which the white man was bound to respect. So you had the right to go to the field and pick cotton or to hoe cotton, which, by the way, I'm a sharecropper's daughter. I understand the South very well. I picked and hoed cotton most of the 9 months out of the 12 months that were in a year. You might say, well, it was cold, you couldn't pick and hoe cotton then. No, but you were salvaging the fields and preparing them because they were going to be planted again for the next year. I didn't go to school from August to October. I didn't go to school because that was harvest time. I went in November, I went for the part of December, January, February, and March. But then come April, it was back to tilling the fields again. And this was okay in the South because the Board of Education understood that the land had to be tilled, it had to be worked, and we were the workers, we were the hired help. So we had to work in the fields. So having a certain amount of days that you had to attend school didn't apply to us because we were working in the fields. My point is, I didn't fulfill, my siblings and I did not fulfill the amount of days that were required to go to school. In 65, right after the second Civil Rights Act, because the first one was in 1865 when the slaves were initially freed. When they were initially freed, there was this clause and conversation in the government about 40 acres and a mule to give Black people an edge so that they could get started on their lives. The 40 acres and the mule never happened. So they were put in the streets basically with nothing to do because now they don't work on the master's farm. So now where do they go? Well, they're loose in the streets, and here comes constables on patrol, COP, constables on patrol. That's what COP stands for. And they were there really to round up the streets. And this is when the anti-loitering laws came around. It was to get the Negroes off the street. My point in telling you that is there was a reason for laws. We make laws and we enact laws so that we can control the population. Even Abraham Lincoln, the future great emancipator, announced in 1858 that he was not in favor of making voters or jurors or Negroes, nor of qualifying them to hold office, nor to intermarry with white people, miscegenation. That was a big no-no. As he saw it, as long as Blacks and whites coexisted, there must be the position of superior and inferior. In such a situation, he favored the superior position assigned to the white race. Now, that might be a little bit shocking to some of you because of what we think we know about Abraham Lincoln. I actually learned this way before I hit college, but it was important to know. There you see, following the Civil War and the demise of the federal reconstruction in the South, the Supreme Court sided with those who attempted to reassert white supremacy. In 1896, it ruled that separate but equal facilities were constitutional, a decision that legalized a color barrier and condoned Southern attempts to segregate most facets of American life. I'm going to stop this share, and I am going to share my screen again. And not exactly there yet. I don't think you can see my screen, correct? You cannot. So let us go back to share screen. There we go. And let's look for, Now, separate but equal. Is anyone familiar with the doll experiment and Jane Elliott? If so, take a note of that, Doug, because I'm expecting probably most people won't understand the doll experiment. Let me explain the doll experiment for you. The doll experiment, and you can find this on YouTube, doll experiment had to do with the Board of Education and Brown. Brown consisted of Kenneth Brown and Mamie Brown, both PhDs from Columbia University. They used a black doll and a white doll, and they showed it to multiple children, black children. The black children, over 60 to 70%, chose the white doll. Which is the nice doll? The black children chose the white doll. Which is the good doll? The black children chose the white doll. Which doll is the bad doll? The black children chose the black doll. So now we're getting into some serious psychological behavior, how you can teach people to feel about themselves. Which is the doll? Which doll is the mean doll? The black children chose the black doll. So this doll experiment was used in the federal courts to fight segregation, because separate is not equal. When you separate people in the instance that they are not good enough to be in a space where other people are, this is psychologically deteriorating to that group of people. This is what the doll experiment proved about black children, much less black people, how you start to train them to think negatively about themselves. I'm going to play for you now. Can you see my screen? Okay, it has Jane Elliott on it, tonight's show?
Yes.
Okay, good. I have to ask, I just want to make sure you can see it. I'm going to play this for you. Jane Elliott did this in 1968. The Board of Education, Brown versus the Board of Education, that happened in 1943, I believe. So now we're 20 years later. And remember, 43 to 64 or 5, which is when the Civil Rights Act actually was managed, and we were now enforcing, even though the federal government had said post haste we must desegregate, it didn't happen. It did not happen until 64, 65, when the Civil Rights Act went into place. Now, I want to digress a minute to say to you that I'm from the South, and my hometown is Abbeville, South Carolina, Due West, South Carolina. My school district did not honor the Civil Rights Act. They did not honor it. In the South, we refuse, we resist, and we renegotiate. There was a renegotiation. The renegotiation was freedom of choice. Freedom of choice was something the South came up with so that they could give the students or the parents a form. You complete the form designating which school you want your children to attend. White parents did not get the form because they intended to go to their white school. African American, Black, brown parents got the form and signed for their children to go to the white school. That is what my parents did. And that is why I ended up, my siblings and I in 1965, integrating our white high school. Now, what happened to the school and its resources when the county refused? Our superintendent had to go to Washington, not one time, not two times, but three times before he could get some negotiations done so that we could get funding back. Now, the superintendent was all for integration, but just because you're a superintendent of schools and you are a leader in a white community does not mean that you get to do what you want. You still have to work with the community in which you are supervising and in which you live. So in that space, he had to abide by the majority vote, which was not to integrate. And it forced him to go to Washington, D.C. 3 times to lobby, to speak with the legislature on retrieving our funding. I'm going to play this for you. This is 1968. Jane Elliott is now 80 plus years old. She was 22 when she did this experiment that she's going to talk about. So she's been talking to us about how we behave for 50 plus years. Let's listen to what she has to say. Can you all hear?
It was a little garbled. Let's see if it'll work.
All right, because if we don't have the voice on, and I should have said that to you, if we don't have voice on for the video for Zoom, it won't play. Let's try it one more time.
It's not coming through for me.
Yeah, we're not hearing that.
Yep. It's trying to, but it's garbled.
Okay, so
Dr. Diane, did you click the those
Okay.
two little boxes
all
on?
right, so I'm going to stop that share. So now would I have clicked them when I entered, or will I click them before I do the share?
Right before you do the share, there are two little boxes, just as you're getting ready to share screens, there are two little boxes that say optimize video and optimize audio. And that's what needs to be clicked, I believe.
Can you hear me?
We can now. You were muted for a second.
Okay, so I actually went out and came back in. So I think I might not try that because it doesn't give me an option to say if I want voice or not. And I don't know if that was clicked when we started, but I do know if we don't click that we want voice on the videos, it won't show. But I will explain to you, for those of you who are not familiar with the blue eyes, brown eyes experiment. Dr. Jane Elliott in 1968 was preparing in Riceville, Iowa for her 3rd grade class to talk about cultures. That was her lesson for the week. She was making a teepee, ironing it on the floor, and her sister called her and said, "Have you turned on the television today?" She says, "No, I haven't, not today." She says, "Well, you need to, because you need to listen." "Well, what happened?" "Well, they've killed him." And she said, "Killed who?" She said, "Because in that era, we were killing everybody." So they said, Dr. King. And she said at that point, she became tomato sandwich soup. She said it just really hurt her. It gave her a profound meaning in her soul that King and Malcolm X were not going to get together and make changes, because she felt like they were coming closer together, and they both were killed. She said she watched the TV. Dan Rather came on and was asking some of the Black intellectuals, "Well, when our leader died, his wife guided us. Who's going to guide your people?" She said those kinds of comments really bothered her. So she balled up the TP, threw it in a corner, and she went to school, and she thought the next day, my students are going to learn what it feels like to be discriminated against. So in so doing, she went to school. She had her students to be separated into 2 sections. There were the brown eyes and there were the blue eyes. And she gave the brown eyes the first day all the food they wanted at the dining room table. They could drink from the water fountain. They could play on the big toys on the playground. The blue-eyed children could not have seconds, had to have a cup to go to the water fountain, couldn't drink from the water fountain. Oh, and they had to use another bathroom too. And they could not play with the brown-eyed kids on the toys. They had to stay off in a corner by themselves. She said it was devastating. She took the brown-eyed children and said to them, "You're very smart. Here's our lesson for today." She took one-on-one time with them and explained the lesson. She said they did very, very well. And she let the blue eyes struggle by themselves to figure their lessons out. And she told them that they weren't as smart as the brown-eyed children. And the next day she reversed the experiment. She said, had she known what was going to happen, maybe she wouldn't have done it. But at that time, she says her parents owned a restaurant in a hotel. They lost their business. She said her children got spat upon, their clothes were stolen. And she said, really, nobody at school spoke to her because nobody wanted to speak to an in-lover. And nobody wanted to be bothered with her kids because they had an in-lover for a mother. So 50 years later, she still does those experiments continuously. And as 80-something years old, she still travels. She's still doing them. And she says the results are still the same. We still have ideas that we've been trained, indoctrinated to believe, and it's difficult for us to let go. Folks, that's your unconscious and implicit bias. We need to understand why we have it. And I just gave you a few things, just the tip of the iceberg. We need to understand that. We need to not hate. I just told you that I'm the product of historical rape from white men in my family because it was no marriage. Remember the miscegenation laws. I'm sorry, my tongue is doubling up on me right now. But anyway, you remember those laws. And also Plessy versus Ferguson is another law, which is the one drop rule. They could prove that you had one drop of black in your blood. You can't claim white. So I don't know how many drops of black I have in my blood, but I don't claim white. I mean, I claim Negro, I claim black. I have to claim what I am in this society because I have to move and navigate in this society as a black person. My point to you is we get indoctrinated into believing certain things about people. We need to open up our minds. We need to educate ourselves on the agenda that I set to Doug. I offered some places and spaces where you could look and educate yourself. Think about eugenics. Do you know what that is? Eugenics, we did this as Americans in the early 1900s. We were going to make a pure race. Now, you might have thought that was Hitler. No, that was the United States. We did that in the early 1900s. We were sterilizing people because if they had any type of birth defect, they didn't look normal, they were slow. We labeled them as idiots and imbeciles. We convinced their parents to let us put them away, and we sterilized them. It even happened to the rich, where a rich woman, her last name was Cooper, her husband was very rich, left money to her and to the daughter if the daughter had children. Well, the mother wanted the entire inheritance, so she had the daughter sterilized under the guise of having an appendectomy. Eugenics, that's ours. We started it and we taught Hitler how to do it. Think about who we are and where we are. I've got a minute coming up before we're at 10:45. What I want to say to you is we are taught to hate. We can unteach that. We can unteach. We need to read. A professor, Dr. Daniel Fairbanks at Utah Valley University, he was my dean for many years, wrote a book called, and I'm looking for that one now, Everyone is African. Everyone is African. There are no races of people. We're all, and Jane Elliott says this as well, we're all cousins. We're all cousins. We came from the same place, mitochondrial Eve, sub-Saharan African female, and we are all black, all of us. We moved away from the equator. We moved away from the sun. We had to put clothes on. We didn't have vitamin D. We didn't make melanin We don't have it in our skins. We moved away. That's why when you get old, all your melanin leaves your hair. Okay. When you don't have melanin in your eyes, you have blue eyes, you have green eyes. You don't have the dominant brown eyes. My point in telling you this, scientists don't argue with the fact we came from mitochondrial Eve, sub-Saharan African. There are some scientists that are saying there were more mitochondrial Eves, but we, according to scientists, biologists, and geneticists, I also teach genealogy in the nursing program. I have a course I teach my students. I cover a lot of this. I also teach online, massive online open courses. And you can enroll in them if you'll email me. I gave you my email address, justusocializing@gmail.com. I run them 12-week courses. I work with the police department. I do courses for them because people, it may not be that you didn't do it, because as James Baldwin, African-American gay man from the 60s, you'll see him on David Frost shows and what have you. If you Google him, he was a man before his time. But as he put it, you didn't do it. I didn't do it either. But we're all responsible because we're adults. And we have a responsibility to try and make this work. Otherwise, we've already developed something that's very toxic for our children and our grandchildren. It's our responsibility to fix it. So it's not about the luxury of I didn't do it, because none of us have that luxury to say I didn't do it, because it's not about who did it. It's about here it is. We've inherited it. We need to work with it, and we need to try to fix it. And I'm going to close now for questions.
Thanks, Dr. Folks, if you have questions you'd like to ask, please type those into the chat box. If you need to ask that verbally, we can have you open your mic, but we'd ask people to stay muted if you're not asking a question. Doug, I was going to let you run the Q&A.
Well, I don't see any questions coming in yet, but I just have some of my own observations as we go through this. It's interesting. I think that there's so much history here that so many of us aren't even aware of, and we don't really understand what has shaped our societal views. I remember lots of times during my life hearing people say, well, we've had 150, 200 years, since the end of the Civil War, more than 150 years. What isn't that enough time, for this to resolve itself? But the thing is as Dr. Diane has pointed out, is it didn't just end, with the Civil War. And Dr. Diane might want to comment on this a little bit, but if you look at the Black Code laws and how the attempts, were there in society to find ways around, the slavery issue, and how to keep people, subjugated, and how to keep those people who are in power with the power that they needed, for their livelihood, the way they saw it. And a lot of these things that have happened over the last century and a half plus are things that we shouldn't be real proud of, and so we're not really aware of them because they haven't been taught to us. And that was something I think that is really worthwhile for us to look into and to think about. What am I not aware of? What is it that is out there that could help me understand better? Because I don't have the big picture. We often think we know what we know, and that's maybe the sum total of what needs to be understood. But there's so much out there that we really don't know. Dr. Dan, I was just wondering, well, here's a question that just came in from Laura Purdue. To what extent are we responsible? I've taken a look at myself this year dealing with the hashtag Black Lives Matter movement and have tried to improve. However, being in the first trimester dealing with morning sickness and also full-time at the health department dealing with COVID-19, when George Floyd died, I felt that social media was telling me I was a terrible person because I wasn't doing enough I can't give equal weight to every issue that's happening. Dr. Diane, how would you respond to Laura?
Yes. So Laura, what was your question?
She says, to what extent are we responsible? I've taken a look at myself this year dealing with the Black Lives Matter movement, and I've tried to improve, but she has a lot going on in her life between being pregnant and work and everything else that's going on. How do we give this equal weight to every issue that's happening?
Well, this is a big issue. I wished I could say it wasn't. And the police departments, the chiefs are always saying to me, we just don't know where this is going. They're worried. Do we have enough force to manage? Let me just tell you what Dr. Paul Reed said. I've grown increasingly discouraged over the past 2 years, which Laura, you probably have too. I watch racial violence continue in incident after incident. One response from the Black community has been the organized Black Lives Matter movement. The backlash from other Americans is to assert that all lives matter. It is a stunning response to me that wholly misses the point of the Black Lives Matter movement and demonstrates an inability for some Americans to attempt to stand in anyone else's shoes. I'd like to offer some historical evidence that is designed to help us take a step back from all lives matter and personalize an attempt to look at the racial violence from a different point of view. In the fall of 1838, my white Mormon ancestors, Belinda and Levi Newton Myrick, arrived at a small outpost in Missouri. On 30 October, a group of Missouri state militiamen, people whose role it was to protect and to serve, rode into that tiny outpost. One white Mormon raised his hands and waved his hat in signal for peace to ask for quarter. He was met with gunshots. One eyewitness later described what happened to one Mormon, Thomas McBride. He was a very old man. After he had given up his gun and surrendered himself a prisoner, he was shot down, and after laying a little while and attempted to rise, he was hewn down with an old piece of a corn cutter blade. After a while, he attempted to rise again. He then was hacked down and hacked into pieces. This was done by Jacob Rogers, a member of the Missouri State Militia. Now, if you are of the dominant religion, or if you know anything about the religious history of Mormons, yes, we know, we get told as African Americans how prejudiced they were. Well, they were no more prejudiced than the rest of the world at that time, if you ask me. So you're not going to get me to bash the Mormons for being prejudiced. Here's the thing. Mormons, if anybody, should understand Executive Order 44. That was Lilburn Boggs. He put it in place. He was tired of the Mormons in Missouri. So he put it in place, and this is the result of it. This is the militia coming out to kill Mormons because the Executive Order 44 said you can kill a Mormon on sight. That was on the books to 1976, came off in 76. Kill a Mormon on sight. So this is what Executive Orders does, and this is what you can do. They not only shot him, they hacked him into pieces. Just like Tanzania, when you're an albino. Over there, everybody's black. So if you come out albino, that's what they do with you. They hack you into little pieces. In America, we just shoot you or put our foot in your neck until you stop breathing. My ancestors, Levi and his 9-year-old son, Charles, ran to the blacksmith shop for protection. It was a terrible place to hide. The Missouri militia poked their guns through the slats in the boards and fired at point blank range. Levi was killed. Charles and 2 other boys, ages 10 and 6, hid behind the bellows in the blacksmith shop. Upon discovery, members of the militia blew off the upper part of the 10-year-old boy's head, mortally wounded Charles and ancestors who were 9, and he died a few weeks later and wounded the 6-year-old boy in the hip. Now, the 6-year-old boy is a great-great-great-great-grandfather to this W. Paul Reed, PhD. As justification for shooting the boys, one militia member reportedly exclaimed, "Nits make lice." In other words, kill it while it's little so it doesn't grow. It's like with the Indian. The white man said, kill the savage, save the man, which is why they took the savages, quote, the Indians, out of their homes and put them in the white people's home in Utah with no real reunification plan. So once they're in these homes, they didn't see their mothers. A lot of those Indian mothers didn't give their children up. They were taken. So just think about having to give up your child, having it taken from you. Think about these pens and pastures that they're putting the immigrants whom ISIS caught, how they're treating them. And The records are coming out that a lot of them are being sterilized. Mormons at the time recognized this and complained about one Mormon leader, Parley Pratt, that how he had been treated and had been treating as if he were some savage tribe, as we had been treated as some savage tribe or some colored race of foreigners. Get that? Colored race and savage. You see the two labels? This is what happens when you label people. Indians are savage, and these colored people, they're foreigners. And Heber C. Kimball, another Mormon leader, acknowledged that the saints were not considered suitable to live among white folks. Paul writes about that in his book. No one race was brought to justice. Nobody was brought to justice. Same thing in Mountain Meadows Massacre on the East Coast, where they claimed the Mormons went blackface and they went out looking like Indians and black people and killing. Nobody was brought to bear for that crime either. Following the Mormon expulsion from Missouri, Mormon leader Joseph Smith asked his followers to write redress petition to the United States Congress, asking for federal intervention and compensation for the loss of life and property they experienced in Missouri. Professor Clark W. Johnson from BYU collected over 800 of these affidavits, and the RSC at BYU published them. As I read them in today's content, I hear Mormons from the 1830s and 40s in these 100 petitions basically saying Mormon lives matter. Let me read you a small portion of my ancestor Philonda Myrick's petition after she lost her husband and her 9-year-old son. The mob came upon us in the after part of the day and commenced firing on helpless men, women, and children. And there was 15 killed and buried in one hole the next day, and others wounded, some mortally. Another, whom was my husband, Levi, Myrick instantly killed, and also a child of mine, mortally wounded, who died about 4 weeks after. Amanda Smith, another petition writer, also lost members of her family, wrote, I now leave it with this honorable government to say that my damages may be, or what they would be willing to see their wives and children slaughtered for, as I have seen my husband's son and others slaughtered. In short, she wrote, all my whole damages are more than the state of Missouri is worth. If you were a Mormon in Missouri in 1838, facing a state-sanctioned extermination order, how would you feel if the response you got was all Missouri lives matter? Mormons who were unarmed and whose hands were in the air were shot down in Missouri. They wrote petitions, 800 petitions, pleading for justice and arguing that Mormon lives matter. Today, Black Americans may indeed feel like Mormons in 1838, Missouri, that there is an extermination order against them and that their lives don't matter. The Black Lives Matter movement simply means that Black lives matter too. Black lives also matter in a time when the justice system seems to imply otherwise. When I read this, the way Paul did it, I felt he totally nailed it. And when people say all lives matter, I just say, well, yeah, all lives matter, just not Black lives. Because, if all lives matter, then why not Black lives? This gets into areas where people get uncomfortable. And folks, in order to have these conversations, we're going to get uncomfortable. But we need to have them. We need to talk about them. We need to understand, as someone said, I don't know if it was Doug or Jason, we have a history, people. America has some history. We have an underbelly. We need to deal with it. And I think we can come out on top. We can lead out, but we've got to have the conversations. So Laura, that's what I would say to you is we got to have the conversations. All of us have to own it. I have to own it. You do. We all do. Because this is what we've been given. It's not a matter of who did it anymore. That's not a luxury we have. It's not a privilege for sure that I have. I can't walk away. You have white skin. If you don't want to deal with this, I admit it. You can walk away. That's privilege. I don't have that privilege. I cannot walk away. I have to stay in the fight.
Dr. Diane, there's another question here about how do we improve trust in our institutions, particularly with police departments?
I'm coming out of the share. You do what I do. I went to them because my heart was so heavy. In 2014, I had to write them. This was after Ferguson, because I have Black children. They're brown. And I had to ask somebody. I wrote to the church. They didn't write me back. So I wrote to the police departments, and I got a response from Provo and Orem. I wrote to Lehigh. I wrote to American Fork, Provo, and Orem. And Provo and Orem responded. I've been working with them for the past 6 years. Guys, you work with the police department. And we call them out. We call each other out. I call out nurses. We call out nurses and doctors who don't do things right. You know what happens to us when we mess up? Y'all sue us. Okay, that's what happens. But you know, we would hate to get to that point because policemen don't have that much money anyway. But you know, when the cities get sued, you know who's paying? We are. Those are tax dollars. It's not coming out the policeman's pockets. It's coming out of tax dollars. It's yours and mine. We're paying for it when the cities get sued. So how we talk, whoever asked that question, guys, we talk. We have to. We don't have a choice.
Right. Dr. Diane, we had a request to have you hold up the first book that you quoted.
Yes.
Religion of a Different Color. And who is the author again?
W-P-A-U-L Reeve, R-E-E-V-E.
Great, thank you.
I'm going to give you one other person that works along with Paul and does a lot of repairing and managing the damage that some of the reality of a book like that will bring to you. All right. And that person is Dr. LaShawn, L-A, I'll put it over here in the chat, I think. Oh, did I ever send that? I've got something in there. Looks like I didn't send it. Let me see if I can push. Okay, there we go. All right. So this person here does a lot of alleviation of stress and helping you to manage going forward after you get all of this underbelly information.
And we'll include this information in our emails that we'll send out to everybody who is registered for the event today, so that you can refer back to these references that Dr. Diane's sharing.
Yes. And I don't know if someone put it in the chat box, or if I put it in the chat box. It might have been part of that dialogue I just sent you, that there were rapes of women involved in this as well when that militia came through. And the feds, when they came in, they didn't really help the Mormons. They fired on the Mormons. This is what happens when you get a label and when people trash you. African Americans have been trashed. It happened with the president, Woodrow Wilson, and his friend D.W. Griffith. Birth of a Nation. Go look that film up. It's about 3 or 4 hours long. It's got white people that are in blackface, which is why we don't like people doing blackface, and portraying black men as always wanting to rape white women, when it really was the white man was doing all the rape. I know, I'm a product of it. I know full well what happened in that. Breeding slaves out of black women. But the mantra of that movie was that black men want to eat watermelon fried chicken and run the country and rape white women. And that is what it was. And Woodrow Wilson showed it in the White House. And a lot of black intellectuals fought against it. It was really the birth of the Klan, because we got to get the Klan back on board now, because the slaves have been freed and they're just going to try to take over. They want to vote. This is the big issue about us voting. Didn't want us to vote. And Dr. LaShawn Williams here, Relational Spaces, she does a lot of work that helps to mitigate when you start to seeing these things come forward, because it's an uncomfortable place. It's very uncomfortable. But she does a great job on mitigating and helping people navigate those spaces. But that one book, I think if you are in Utah, you have any history with the dominant church, it's probably a good book to read. Can't hear you, Jason.
Thank you, Dr. Diane. We appreciate your candor, and we appreciate this presentation. It's definitely timely, and I think a lot of eyes have been opened today. Thank you so much for that. We'll wrap up with this. Doug, did you have anything else to add?
And just look for the email that we'll send out after the presentation today with references and information regarding the presentation and how to contact Dr. Diane and her organization if you're interested in learning more about the educational programs that she's involved with.
Hey, Doug, You know what? Maybe we can work out something for a little small fee where I can do the book club and we can do it online. And I know seriously, but I will take them through it. I have to tell Doug that because he roped me into doing this for free, but it's okay. I've enjoyed it.
Well, we'd love to visit with you some more for sure.
All right. We are recording this session, and it will be it's live right now on YouTube. So it will take probably a half hour before it renders to YouTube for you to go back if you want to share that with other people. But please go to our YouTube channel and subscribe there, and so you can get notifications when we do material just like this, along with a lot of other valuable things. Thanks once again, Dr. Dan. We appreciate that, and we'll wrap up this session now. Thanks.